from MindPlore with Carla and Friends. As you can see, we almost have the typical Thursday crowd. I have Jeff Pulver, who you know, and Kamran, who have been regular Thursday people. Jeff is making a decision on it now. I'm hoping I'll get him back at least twice a month, if not every day, every Thursday. And then we have Jeanne. We love Jeanne, but we're not sure how long this will be lasting because we don't know what's happening with Allison. Having said that, Jeanne, please don't take that personally.
I don't.
We are talking about reframing joy and making joy more a part of our lives. And with that, Jeanne, you know what I have to do, including getting that link for you guys. So can you guys take over while I get all that taken care of? Thank you.
Great. We want to explore reframing joy. A while back, somebody said to me that they were really happy, but they're really, really busy. But when things stop, they were bored. And it dawned on me that seems to be a pattern for a lot of people. We might be adrenaline junkies. We might need to have that kind of busy, and forget to be human beings. We are human doings instead. And so I thought it would be great, and Carla and I discussed this, to explore how to reframe the idea of joy, because we might be happier than we allow ourselves. So I picked a few interesting quotes to kind of kick it off for everyone. The Dalai Lama said, "Happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions." So it talks about the responsibility that we probably might touch on how we see the world. Jimmy Dean, a great American country singer who's known today by most folks as the Sausage Man because he makes a great breakfast sausage, and he's a big brand, but he said, "I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination," which is a great illustration of how reframing works. And then finally, the great American literature professor and the leader of What is Myth, Joseph Campbell, said, "We must be willing to let go of the life we planned, so as to have the life that is waiting for us." And that's I think a little spotlight on how we might think that we're in control, but if we can let go just a little bit, we might have something bigger out there. One of my favorite jokes, Kamran, is to say, "How do you make God laugh?" And the answer is simple. You tell him your plans. What do you think of that? You're muted.
Yes, I think that is remarkable, because it is when our plans are dashed that we discover there's a power bigger than us. And Jeanne, what a way to introduce happiness. Every time one fumbles or falls, or I think one can take it very, very seriously and be very depressed as a result, or one can develop this healthy habit of laughing at yourself and developing a healthy dose of humor. And I think humor is perhaps the most powerful tool that we have, and it requires a lot of intelligence, by the way. So what a way to start. So I was looking at the subject and came across two elements. One, the chemical scientific element to happiness, which is very odd. And the other is how easy it is to essentially get ourselves into that state of joy and happiness. Joy is an inner feeling, from what I gather, from literature that I've read, and I also relate that to my own experiences. And happiness is more of an ambient expression which goes over time. So joy are the spurts of delight, whereas happiness is that condition that we would like to be in, And interestingly, we would never enjoy these conditions if we never saw sorrow and pain. Sorrow and pain acquaint us to happiness and joy. And the deeper the agony and the pain that we go through, the more joy and ecstasy we experience. I mean, I remember reading this book on Michelangelo, his life story, a story of dedication by Irving Stone called The Agony and the Ecstasy. And it's a novel that I read. It was so compelling that I ended up going to Italy, Florence, and looking at the statue of David and all the beautiful works that he had done in Florence and places like that. So I feel that it is something to be reckoned with. And at the core, I was reading up Ikigai recently. And there's this book I got hold of recently, a gift that came to me from a friend. And finding our purpose and being clear on why we are on this planet is a very solid anchor to happiness itself. It is when we are lost and we don't know why we live and why we came to this world, this fundamental question, who am I and why am I here and what am I meant to do? If this is resolved, then we are on our way to happiness. And happiness is a state that we would love to be in order to make contributions of a kind that inspire others. And at the same time, we need to remain aware that all emotions are proof of us being alive. So if I only want to entertain happiness in my life, then I feel that's the half-truth that's not going to work. It is a rich blend of emotions that we feel from time to time, and we need to accept them. And acceptance is also key to happiness as life goes on. When it comes to chemicals, I think that is something I'd love to mention. And I was delighted by the answer that came. Chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin. Now, these chemicals, how are they released? And they are released through such commonsensical measures like exposure to bright light, especially sunlight, is one way to increase serotonin. Exercise and happy thoughts also stimulate production of this chemical, and Carla is constantly infusing the planet with happy thoughts. Some research has found that a higher intake of tryptophan, heavy foods, relative to other foods in the diet may do the trick as well. So I had no idea that chemicals could feel happiness, but they certainly work in our brains, and finding that balance is through exercise and sunlight and so much else. So I just thought I'll give these initial thoughts and leave it for Jeff and Carla and you to amplify.
So Jeff, it looks like you're ready to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate everything that's been shared, and my starting point is just to remember that our consciousness is really a chemical in our mind, and the way that we perceive the world is really just it's our state of being, and the way we see things, and what differentiates this species from other species is our consciousness, and with that consciousness, which is really a chemical. Sometimes when it's imbalanced, or at least based on certain parameters imbalanced, what we see and how we perceive our own reality shifts. And the idea of doing things that bring more joy and delight into our life, as it's been mentioned, right? If we can find ways to optimize on, if you will, internal chemicals that we already have, there's no need necessarily to ingest pharmaceuticals which are manufactured. Our body has the amazing ability to give us mostly what we need for that extra joy and delight. And then it's the activities we engage in that allow ourselves to give ourselves permission to be more delightful. And so there's a whole element of coming up with a practice of self-love that allows us to focus on things that make us feel good, do good, and leave us in a positive spirit. And there's a physical realm of exposure to light, and in some cases the darkness of the night sky. But really, if you've ever been under a truly dark sky without light pollution, under a full moon, it's almost like being in the sun because you could read from under the moon. And I've been fortunate to be in areas where it's complete darkness, but after 20 minutes, when your eyes fully adjust, even if your eyes don't see the light reflecting off the ocean, the camera does. And it's totally remarkable about the sense of wow and awesome that comes through that. So for me, it's, there's a whole area of getting to joy and delight and sustaining it. But in daily everyday practice, to give ourselves permission to really reshape and reform our reality is part of that practice as much as just how we approach things. And if part of that journey is to determine your purpose here and to understand who you are, one of the simplest, the easiest meditations I've ever been part of, Malika Chopra, at a conference I hosted several years ago, and she came several times. Her very simple "I am," where you close your eyes, meditation, and you just answer. You say the word "I am," and then you fill in what you are to yourself. As you focus, that opens up so many portals and so many things, and that brings in the opportunity for you to relax, perhaps fall asleep, but be in a relaxed state. And I've never fallen asleep angry during a meditation. Somehow I always seem to be happy, and I'm happy when I come out of it. It never reveals anything ugly. The reality is that from a divinity perspective, there's goodness, right? And we're able to determine and find that light and that goodness that will drive us. So I haven't found anything bad at all about going on that side. And when we were starting the conversation today about adrenaline junkies and the need for to be stimulated, I will say that I sometimes get the best ideas when I'm very busy. That if you give me chaos, at least a certain type of chaos, it inspires me to get to clarity. And there are times when total calmness, not that it's boring, not that I don't enjoy the absolute joy and delight of being in a moment and being in the now and staying in that flow, because that's where I like to be. If I have a business desire to accomplish something, I just find that when I'm busy in my mind, I get clarity. And without clarity, I just go the other way and just allow myself to enjoy those moments too. But for me, it's not that I need the stimulation, but it's the pressure of the moment gets me to the solution much faster at times than if I just have all that time and serenity just to enjoy life. So I find balance, and I find ways to enjoy the magic of the moment. And there are times when I think I'm advertising the magic of the moment to others more than taking it in even for myself. But when we get into flow and we get into that time where you carry your past, your present, and your future with you, something which I'll just refer to as a state of now, everything comes together and makes so much sense. And it's, while we can talk about it in the abstract, giving yourself permission to be happy, allowing yourself to stay happy, and then not letting anyone else tell you what happiness is, but for you to define it on your own terms, opens a portal of where I think we all want to get to. Because if we always have to be compared to someone else, or someone else is experiencing something else, in recent years, we have this fear of missing out and this anxiety. But if you just allow yourself to find those things, I had a serious medical issue a few years ago, and I ended up dedicating my Instagram to focusing at the time on sunrises and sunsets, because not only they're so delightful, but for all my friends who are just too busy in their lives to look up at the magic of the morning sky or evening sky. So I started posting lots of sunrises and sunsets, because I believe that every day we can make a difference. Every day is when day ends, another will begin. And with that, it's literally it's the first day of the rest of your life. And with that comes the opportunity to do almost anything and everything. And so I look at sunrises and sunsets differently now than I used to, because I just have an appreciation for every moment. And I hope that people don't need to have life-changing experiences to appreciate the magic of that sky. And if you've ever watched those morning skies, whether it's the night sky with the northern or southern lights, or just a spectacular sunrise, it's It's one of the most amazing things that are still free on this earth. You just have to take the time to do it. So I'm
It's
an advocate of embracing joy and delight, and I think we could find it in so many different ways. We just have to keep our eyes open and keep our minds open too.
it's funny you talk about the sunrises and the sunsets. It's finding a silver lining, which is kind of, I want to say trite, but it's something that's always told, when there's a crisis, you need to find a silver lining. Well, out here in the West, everybody knows we've got these horrible wildfires going on, but you go outside at sunset and the colors are spectacular because the smoke's there, so there's all these filters on the sunlight. You get such a bright, almost maroon color that you can only be in awe. It takes a while to get that on your paint palette when you're trying to mix it. And in the morning, it's just this beautiful pinkish color. So that, to me, that's kind of a silver lining. I hate the fires, but at least you get a moment of beauty. And I like that you said sometimes we have to just remember. I often say we're a walking chemistry lab. So Cameron, your lessons about chemicals are very, very important. But I tend to say that when my doctors are saying something like, we need to have you take, I'm like, we're a walking chemistry lab. Everything we do is about chemicals. Please tell me why this is important. But naturally, we're chemistry labs. Getting the right reactions come from not only our thought, but in our emotions. And I think that we get so busy, we don't want to feel our emotions. I don't think that that's something that that's been made okay. You're not allowed to be really mad, for example. You're not allowed to be overjoyous, so getting in touch with emotions helps us be in that moment, as you talked about, in that state of now. And that's kind of why I wanted to explore this, because when my friend said it was just boring, I was thinking, I kind of revel when it's finally quiet, and I find it calming. So I wanted to say, what's your problem? But it's not anybody's problem. It's how we perceive things. We can perceive things with a positive bent or with a negative bent. And it's that moment when you have that stimulus. I think it was Stephen Covey who said, between the stimulus and the response, you get to make a decision. Well, I take it one step further. Between the stimulus and the response, you can choose heaven or hell. You can choose to be chaos or serenity. And I choose serenity. But it takes practice, because it's so easy to jump into chaos. And the amount of adrenaline that comes when you're in a chaotic space is phenomenal. But one of the things that you said, it reminded me of a book I read way back in the ancient times, before the turn of the century, in the 80s. It was written by Roger Van Eyck, and it was called Whack on the Side of Your Head. He was a famous creative director, and he said he reads everything when he has to come up with a new campaign. He reads everything. He gets all the research. He pretty much interrogates all of the business folks on the account side, and then he goes fishing. And it's when he goes fishing, he gets into the flow, and the ideas come. So whether you need to have the chaos or you need to have a certain ritual, it's allowing the flow to come, which you called it right, Jeff. You called it magic moments. When you get into the flow, you kind of lose the sense of time and space, and it's a beautiful time. And that's when some really good ideas come. That's when some inspiration comes. But we have to allow that. And that's I think what hit me when my friend said that. We have to allow ourselves to be joyful and allow ourselves to be happy. It's not a badge of courage to say how terrible your life is, although some people, I think, believe that. Carla?
Thank you. I did want to join in. First of all, I do want to ask everyone, how do you define joy? Because joy and happiness to me are two separate things. I believe that everyone has a fountain of joy within, and we don't contact it because we're so busy looking outside that the joy gets lost. And when it's lost, it's very hard to say, hey, where's the joy? So we need to change that. And happiness is like, oh, Jeff is wearing my favorite hat today and I love it and I feel happy because he's wearing that hat. And he's wearing purple glasses, which is even cool. I just noticed. But, and that's happiness. But happiness, like, is a fleeting thing. It constantly is changing. It changes by what we see and what goes on. And joy is something a little deeper. I'm not sure how I define it, but I know with everything, there's two sides of the coin. And we can decide which side we want to look at. We can either look at the fleeting moments and go sad, or we can look at the good thing that happened. Like if Jeff decided it, and I'm calling it on you, Jeff, please forgive me. If Jeff decided not to come to the show at the last minute, I may be a little upset. But then I could look at, I get to talk to Jeanne and Kamran a little longer, and that'll be cool. So what about, I'm not going to worry about Jeff. It's how we focus our mind that gives us that joy, in my mind. So I would like you guys to tell me what you think about that. And I'm going to start. Oh, okay, Kamran, you saved Jeff.
No. I didn't save him. He's got to exercise some patience.
Finding joy and patience.
Yeah.
But remember, I've been picking on him. So
my question is to the panelists, really. It's a question because, when we experience joy, I feel there are some physical symptoms that we can very closely associate with. And I have a couple in my mind, but before I share those, I would love to hear from Jeff or Jeanne or Carla from you. And then in case you have said it, then I'm done. If not, then I'll add my 2 bits.
Well, before you do that, I want you to define joy for me.
Joy to me.
You avoided my question completely.
Your question, I fully relate to where you're coming from. It's an inner state, which I see joy as an inner state and happiness as an expression of that. And it is driven more by external stimuli. And this is how I would see it. Yet the two are a very happy place to be. Very, very happy place. They marry each other. And you do not separate them as such, but their origins could vary. And yet they feel very good. That's how I see it.
Thank you. Who do you want to bug first, Jeff?
I could jump in. I mean, look, when you talk about happiness, I think of a Peanuts song. Happiness is, a cup of ice cream. It's very relative. What I've learned though is that the relativity. If I just go back a little bit to what Jeanne was talking about, because there are triggers, right? So if you've ever sat through an intense lightning storm, and you see the lightning, and then you hear the thunder, and you anticipate, oh my goodness, is this storm coming to me? The moment you have total silence, that's usually a sign, until of course you hear more thunder in the background, that the storm is past. And that brings joy and delight, particularly if you're around family members or dogs that are scared out of their mind when they hear that thunder or they hear the rain. And sometimes that rain is symbolic of turmoil in our lives as much as it is a physical thing. So there's both joy and delight and happiness. But it's like after the lightning storm, when I go out and if I could smell the ionized air, that brings a happy joy. That just brought joy and happiness together because of that experience. So it's experiential. And so I think that throughout our existence, we get to redefine what happiness is to us. And it's really hard to not be judging, because I think that each and every one of us and all 7.78 billion people on this planet should have the opportunity to define for themselves what joy means to them and what happiness means to them. That it's not upon us to decide what makes Cameron happy, what makes Jeff happy, that we have the individual free will to determine our happiness at any moment and any point in our time horizon. And that it might be that if you grow up in a family that you associate a family event by having ice cream together, and you're reminiscing and you have ice cream to bring back a memory, to attach, if you will, a memory to bring into the present moment. And that brings an element of happiness in, and joy and delight. That's okay too. But these are things where it's so easy to be judgmental. And I think that when we can, embrace curiosity, let go of and discernment, and not be judgmental about things, and allow each and every one of us to define in the moment what we're joyful about, what we're happy about, because there's internal happiness, external happiness, internal joy, external joy. You have joy of the individual, you have joy of the community. And in each and every case, it's so many forms, and it's almost unbounded, right? So unbounded joy and delight takes you in one direction. And so we may think that's not a happy person because they don't smile a lot, but they may be smiling on the inside and you just don't know, right? Because we're judging. So if we can let go of the judging and focus and allow the freedom, the possibility that people can actually be in a different state of mind than rather than just looking, because energetically they're at a high vibration and they're oozing in joy and delight, but we don't see it because we're not Tesla wrote that life is all about, vibration, energy, and frequency. And I think that we have that there. And so there are signs of happiness and joy that we may not see on the visual spectrum, but energetically are very present. And I allow the possibility that there are objects around me that are also in this elated form of joy and delight that I don't recognize, but it doesn't mean they're not experiencing it. And so when I look to the higher form of joy and delight, I believe it's truly unbounded, that we're the ones who set the limitations on what we can do. And when we learn to let go of what we can't do, anything and everything could possibly bring us to the higher form of joy and delight, to a point that we've never even experienced yet. That's where I'm coming from.
Hence Joseph Campbell saying we must be willing to let go of the life we planned, because we only know something that's finite. We don't have a clue. Oftentimes when I'm talking about strategy in the business world, I keep saying things like, let's look at it from 25,000 feet. Where are we going in 5 years? Then let's look at 3 years, which is more setting. So that's setting vision, setting goals, and then sea level is the actual tasks. But in the reality, if you're listening to what Jeff just said, our highest self is way up into the ethers, so far up that we wouldn't even know that we can see it. And being in touch with that, from the roots of the earth all the way up to the highest levels of the universe, being in touch with ourselves would allow us to possibly experience things at such a level that we can only be in joy. Because Jeff, you used the word judgment. We stop ourselves because we don't believe that that we could be that happy, or that we deserve to be that happy, whether it's the outward happiness or the inward happiness. And when you have that fleeting, self-defeating thought that I don't deserve this, or I'm not good enough, which many of us struggle with, we stop ourselves from experiencing that level of joy. I've been doing exercises for the last several years. I try to catch myself when I'm in a judgmental mode and stop it, because the only person that hurts is me. It doesn't hurt the person that I'm judging, because it's none of their business what I think, just as it's none of my business what they think. And that is a hard concept to put your hands around. And it's also a freeing concept. You know, when you start to say, okay, they're adults, they can make whatever decision they want. That's up to them. I get to choose whether I accept that or not. That's the only judgment, whether I accept it or not. You know, and that opened up avenues to meet new people that I never thought I would meet before, because I wasn't stopping myself. And it's still a struggle, because in my family lore, judgment, it was a big deal. Truthfully, my father would look at my straight A report card and go, "You could do better," because he wanted to push me on. That's the way, that was his language of love. But at the time, I didn't understand it. So my interpretation of what he was doing was, this isn't good enough. And that's the kind of thing we have to uncover, and then say, that was then, this is now. And understand that was his language of love. He didn't understand how I was taking it. And I get to reinterpret it, because it's what I think that matters. And when you start to find those little things and you kind of reframe them, that's Daddy's language of love, is a reframing. Then the potential for hurt or sadness gets reframed as well. Because now I can say, well, that was his way of showing that he loved me. He wanted to push me on. It may not have been the best, but that's all he knew. So all the judgment goes out. And now I can step forward and be a different person. And when I interact with somebody and they hand me a 4.0 report card, which I understand now they get 4.5 and other things, so they are doing better. But when I see that, I can say, that's great. What do you want to do with all this knowledge? And then get them to think about something that takes them forward, because that's how I am. So this whole idea of reframing is very powerful. Carl, I forgot what we were talking about yesterday, but I remember you said something and I turned around and said it in a different way. And we were both laughing, because, it would have been perfect if we were sitting on the show doing it. But it's like you always say, when people come on your Speaking English show, and I actually witnessed this when I was on the show, when they say, I can't speak English, and you have to say, okay, stop. Did you know what you just did? You spoke English. And guess what? I understood you, which means you speak English. It's amazing the governing thing, the governing capability of our inner thoughts. And retraining our inner thoughts, I think, is a lifelong endeavor.
And it's our inner thoughts that keep us from being happy or sad. If we decide that we're going to focus on everything that didn't go well, like I was yesterday, guess what? More things don't go well. But the moment you say, hey, maybe this is good because now I have an hour free that I didn't expect to have, how can I use it? It shifts what can be done and the opportunities that may exist. And Kamran, you don't need to put your hand up. You just need to open up your mouth.
Thank you. So when I open my mouth, it is because Jeanne was saying something so powerful in terms of it's all in the head, that, the word is, in my view, paradigm that we install, and it becomes a default setting, so that we do not necessarily consciously and deliberately interpret experiences every time, there's a pattern to them. And once we have that paradigm in our mind, then we make it a habit of seeing the more constructive and the more joyous side of events. And, it's the rules by which we interpret reality. So I thought the word paradigm was itching to come out from me, and I wanted to share it, number one. And second, I felt that, happiness is what we experience. And Jeff mentioned the word experience, and he didn't really take the trouble of distinguishing between the two, because we can fall into semantics when it comes to joy, happiness, delight, ecstasy. There are degrees. But if we were simply to look at happiness in its broadest sense, it is what we experience, and this is something I have come to believe. It is what we experience, not just by exercising and being in sunlight and having good nutrition, but also when God flows through us. Happiness is that divinity, which Jeff alluded to earlier. And God flows through us because the good we do in this world, the giving that we do, the kindness, the lending a helping hand, all the goodness we do, it is really God working through us. We become the receptacles. And that flow is what I feel is amazing. And the physical symptoms that I was asking about, lump in the throat, tears, goosebumps, and those physical symptoms we experience are to be cherished. And I know that one is overcome with emotions at times, and one is lost for words because the magnitude of what has happened. So sometimes you really are lost for words, and silence barely contains your tears. You just burst out and you feel amazing. So I think giving as a word, a key word, the more we give of ourselves, I feel that the more happiness we invite into our lives.
One question. You said when we're away, how can we be out of the divinity? We may be not in tune with the divinity as we would like, but how can we not be a part of it? Because we create our own thoughts. We are creators on our own. Please answer that.
Well, I mean, every breath we take is a process of divinity. And we live, I mean, again, it's a question of faith and belief. Every breath one takes, every thing that happens in me, in my body, around me, in the whole world, nothing is without his knowledge or intervention. And I feel that the feeling, the conscious feeling, the physical experience is when you're doing something good and you're being patted by the divine for having done so. Otherwise, his presence is very unknown to us because we are so busy in our humdrum lives as such. Presence will never be denied. It's like the air may be there, we may not acknowledge it. The sky, as Jeff was talking about, the beautiful sky above us, and so much out there in the sunsets and the sunrises. If we are not paying attention, it doesn't mean they don't exist, they do, but we are not paying attention.
Now, one person, you may not be paying attention, but the person next to you may be saying, hey, look at that sky, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Does that person see the beauty because they feel it within? Or do they see the beauty because it's outside of them initially?
Whatever, in my mind, I'll just say this and then let Jeff and Jeanne, shed some light on it.
I'm not going to leave you alone.
Whatever is around us is a projection of what's inside of us. Whatever is around us is a projection of what's inside of us. And I see the universe and the world in which we live as a projection. The four of us here, when I'm looking at you on the screen, you're a projection of me. And I don't see you as a separate part of me. It's just kind of an experience which is very unusual. But no, we are one and the same, coming in different guises from different perspectives.
Okay, Jeff.
Okay, I was waiting. I'm glad I didn't jump the line. So I want to bring another aspect, another dimension into the conversation, because I'm quite grateful to be able to explore from the individual perspective, joy and happiness. One of the gating factors, and this is not something that happens all the time, but there are times when, let's say you're young, and let's put the position that you're a child and there are parents involved. There are times when we are our happiness and joy and delight are actually limited to the way that some people around us see it and perceive it, and for until we have that self-awareness moment where we understand we're part of divinity too, and we have our own choices. For a long while, at times, we are kind of like in the mold of those who influence us in our lives, and that from a child parent perspective, it's our parents that some ways do limit or do set the goals or how we see the world, and that does get extended into communities. And one of the, I'll say, harmful effects of social media is that when we allow ourselves to be defined by others and we lose our individuality, there are times when groups, as if you will, sort of like mob theory and stuff, but it's the group decides spontaneously what's good or bad. The group, it's where you're letting go of your individual freedom to define what you're joy and delightful about, because all of a sudden you take on the consciousness of the group, and that creates a conflict, right? Because when we give of ourselves to others, in some ways, we are not necessarily giving up free will, but we're being directly influenced by that, and I'm not saying there's always a bad thing that happens there, but we need to be aware of it, because if we want to go back to the moment of owning our own joy and delight, we have to give ourselves the celestial strength needed to own it. That I can respect Carla's position on something. I could respect what brings joy and light and love and everything else into her life. And I could allow myself to find other things at times that brings joy, love, and light into my life. And we're both fine about it. I don't need to have an argument. I don't need to be in an argumentative state. I could respectfully appreciate her magic and allow myself to have my magic. Where conflict happens in the world at times is when we forget about those things. And so, and again, if you don't have the training or awareness or knowledge to let go, it gets really hard. So I have experienced on both sides of that, letting other people, unfortunately in my case, decide what's good or bad, and then being influenced by that and finding myself angry because I was not at all in tune with what the group speak was, the group thinking was. And finally, I decided I can be independent, that the divinity that's there is for everyone, including me. And I'm allowed to share my love, my light, my words, and it's okay. And that I will find an existence to coexist if I choose, and that's okay too. And so, but you grow up and you don't necessarily know these things until you discover them. And then when you grow up with a community, it's the same thing. So there's an enlightenment that is possible. And, there's lots of, analogies I can share, but I do believe that it's possible to maintain an independence, where you define on your own terms where your happiness is, and respect, and even be part of multiple communities, but still, and respect their values. And of course, there are communities that perhaps we're thrown into without free will, because that's how we were born into into the containers that have our energy, and that's another conversation for another day. But we have certain situations where you are, and then there's a construction of things that you have control over. And when you learn to let go of worry, because worrying is a waste of time, and you look to focus on the things which are meaningful at that moment for you, happiness and joy is right there for you as a best friend. And you know, it's during those dark moments of time when you could find that light that will guide you through those things. And so I'm always reminded that light wins over darkness, and that and with that light, I attribute joy and delight. I attribute the positivity of what could be, rather than fall through the rabbit hole of the darkness and say, no, it can't be, because I need hope. I need to know there, and I allow the possibility for hope to exist, which is why sometimes we have to go into darkness to find light, but ultimately that light will guide us to where we were meant to be. That is all.
It's interesting that you brought up groupthink, because that's a very powerful energy. Sometimes, or they found that sometimes the people who started the group may not be involved with the group anymore, but their philosophy, their way of thinking influences the people that are now in the group, and that could be generational. And it's really hard to understand it when you're in the middle of it. The other thing that I thought was interesting that you just brought up was, how as we grow up, we're influenced by the people around us, and you start to fall in with them, because that's you're taught that. And then there's this concept of giving away your power. And when I was a young adult, somebody was trying to explain this to me, but I was a little thick. I was like, I don't get it. I don't know what you're saying. And then I saw this little cartoon or comic, where I think it's For Better or Worse, where the mother says to her daughter, Lizzie, she says, Lizzie, Becky tells you to smoke a cigarette and you smoke a cigarette. But Becky tells you to cut school and you cut school. Becky tells you to sneak out and you sneak out. Elizabeth, you're giving Becky all your power. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. It's like, oh, I get to make a decision about everything that I do. I don't have to follow what somebody else tells me. And that was a very powerful moment for me to understand that concept, that I have power and I get to make choice. And that kind of put me on a different path, because there were some people in my life at the time that weren't always looking out for my best interest. The other thing that came up when you were talking, Jeff, was, I grew up as a Catholic, and you can imagine the word sin has a lot of power, Like, somebody could go, well, that's a sin and you're going to hell. Well, I have new responses to that over time, because the actual meaning of sin is really mistake. So when somebody says that's a sin, that changes it to that's a mistake. And what do we talk about mistakes? Mistakes are lessons in real time. If you make a mistake, learn from it, and then you won't make that mistake again. And that changed how I reacted to all of my friends and family that still, have a certain, let's say, Catholic mindset, and they argue with me. And then, I heard that you're going to go to hell. And I was like, well, okay. Hell's actually in the Bible is the dump outside of Jerusalem. It was toxic. It was smelly. It was pretty much a mess. And since my mom said that was my bedroom when I was 7, I've been living in hell since I was 7. So I don't have a problem with that. And it usually takes people aback and like, that's blasphemous. But no, it's not. It's freeing. It's allowing me to have that independent thought, and to change how I'm seeing the world, because I'm not giving my power away to a system of thought or a philosophy that may or may not be serving me. I get to choose what serves me. And I love some of the things in the Catholic Church, and then there are some things that I would argue with with the Pope, if he let me. And that's part of who we are. That's what God made us, is to have independent thought and to experience the world one individual at a time, understanding that we're part of a group, understanding that we have a mind, understanding that we're connected. So the idea of paradigm shift that you talked about, Kamran, every time I have a paradigm shift like that, I find it liberating. And so when I go back to the subject of reframing joy, and I think about the times where things go well, but they're different, and I'm kind of taken aback, I can think about and reframe, what did I feel? And the best description I can have is when my son was little, I used to struggle to get him to sleep. I used to struggle really bad. We'd start at 7:30 and we'd probably end around 10:30, and it was just constant, a power struggle, to be honest with you. And then one night we did something right, and he was asleep by 9 o'clock. And I remember sitting on the couch, somewhat dumbfounded, thinking, what do I do now? I really was at a loss, because that chaos that I've gotten so used to had gone away. And when I'm going through one of those moments of a paradigm shift, I remember that feeling. I felt lost, but I was joyful. I felt like something changed, but I was at peace in that moment. And that at peace part really influenced me at that moment. And to me, that's being in the moment.
Yeah. Being in the moment is being there and being completely present. I've realized my sinuses are killing me today. And because of that, I am not as much in the moment as I normally am. Kamran, can you tell us what being in the moment means to you?
Yes, I was just reading a quote by Joseph Campbell, and he says, find a place inside where there is joy, and the joy will burn out the pain. So that's being in the moment and choosing joy rather than waiting for it to come. And the other very short and simple quote which opened my eyes was by Sidney Harris. Happiness is a direction and it's not a place. So in the moment, choose a direction that puts you into a state of happiness that gets you places.
But is happiness really that joy?
Yes, I would try to combine the two, because they are siblings and they are very much a family. And I'd rather look at it as a bouquet and not separate them very scientifically. I think they're shades of one another and they support each other, like the sun and the moon. I don't know which. Joy perhaps is the sun, and happiness is the reflection in the form of the moon itself. Yeah, that's the way I'd like to see it.
What do you think, Jeanne?
I like that. The sun is joy, and happiness is the reflection in the moon. I know when there's a full moon and I walk outside at night and I look up, I'm always in awe. And so there's some level of awe for me in both happiness and joy. To understand there's something bigger than us. And I think that that's a powerful understanding. There's something greater than us that can put a level of perspective in what we're doing. The majority of what we do every day is mundane. It's how do we live? Do we wash our clothes? Do we do the dishes? Nobody gets excited about your chores. However, you get to influence how you come up in the world by how you do your chores. And if you're the kind of thinker where you get so far up in your head, and you're not even aware that there's trash on the floor because you're being that absent-minded professor, that's a way of life. And you probably will find somebody who gives you great happiness because they're happy to come and clean up behind you to let you do that high-level thinking. Where if you're the one that's always cleaning up, you might get a little frustrated, unless you recognize and put value into what this person is doing. There's always a bit of a struggle in what we do and how we show up in the world with other people. I actually was explaining to someone how in most cases, when there's an altercation of any sort, small or big, it's a power struggle. I've got a 2-year-old grandson who thinks he's all powerful. And, I love it when he doesn't get his way, because he throws his hand up like this and he sinks to the floor and he starts dragging his head along the floor while he cries. So we know that he's dramatic. We know that he wants to make a point, but there's a point where you say, okay, grandson, I know you want all the power, but it's not happening yet, and I know he's doing this because he can't communicate. And so we start to work on how to communicate, and he may not do that many kinds of tantrums, but take that and put it into a 13-year-old teenager. Now they've got words, but they do the same thing because they want a level of power that's more than what they have. Well, adults do this every day. Where do you want to go to dinner? I don't know. No, do you want Mexican? Do you want Italian? I don't know. Well, somebody's giving away their power to somebody else to make all the decisions. And then when that happens, 9 times out of 10, they go, why did you pick this restaurant? So there's always this power struggle. And that's part of that chaotic doing thing that we do, because it makes us feel like we're more important. And I know when I get into the state where I'm kind of, I want to say a joyous state. I've meditated. I'm kind of calm, and people will go, come on, wake up. I'm like, no. You do not want me to wake up, because if I wake up the hyperactive part of me, you're going to be overwhelmed. And I just know. And they're like, what? I go, don't try to take my power away. Let me be who I am. And so now they're like, what do you mean take my power away? I go, this is a power struggle. You want to make the decision for me. And I'm saying, no, I make the decision for me. And there's a middle ground where we can, talk and come to agreement. And I have friends who don't like to do that, but they're learning. So we get to redefine how we are in the world by how we react to people or respond to people, and I think responding would make the world much better, because we're doing something deliberately versus reacting somewhat emotionally, without thought. And, if I'm looking at redefining joy, it's what are those moments and how do you put a spotlight on those moments so you can carry it with you? Because we may not be joyous 24/7, because as you've mentioned, we have to see the dark side from time to time. And as somebody who used to sketch, and I need to try better, to do more, if you sketch and you're drawing, you want a circle to turn into a ball, you have to throw in the shadow. So you need the darkness to add the three-dimensionality. Did I make up a word?
Yeah.
Maybe so. But Jeannie, believe it or not, we've been here for over an hour.
Carla, you bring in such great people that hours just go like that.
Well, I've met some great people, and they keep introducing me to great people. So that's what happens. Jeff, do you want to say any final words in a minute or less?
Yes. First of all, I'm grateful to be here. It's always a joy and delight to see all of you together. It's fun. And for people who are seeking happiness and joy, the power is from within. You have the ability to redefine where you are at any moment in time, take it in, take a deep breath, and embrace your future. It's there waiting for you at any moment. Thank you.
And you took the words out of my mouth. We will be back Tuesday. Hopefully both Cameron and Jeff will be back next week. There's a likelihood one of them will not be, but I'm working on it with kindness. And with that, we'll see you on Tuesday with a new topic and a new panel. I know Jeanne will be back, but I have no idea who else will be here at this moment. And with this, let's wave goodbye and we will talk again on Tuesday. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Jeff, Kamran, and Jeanne, for coming and speaking with me.